Good afternoon and welcome to our distinguished speakers, registered participants and viewers on YouTube to this virtual event on relations between the European Union and the countries of the Western Balkans. I'm Steven Blokmans, Director of Research at CEPS, and it's my pleasure to host this webinar, which unfortunately though coincides with a flare-up of tension at the Kosovo-Serbia border, which led one senior diplomat to state that the countries of the region, quote, have to misbehave to be noticed, but also the admission that, quote, there is a deterioration in the Balkans that stems from the lost interest in EU capitals, unquote. In yesterday's media reports about an alleged impasse between member states over language of the final communique of next week's EU Western Balkan Summit in Brdo, Slovenia, attests to this. And if indeed the reports are true, then the internal disagreements couldn't stand in sharper contrast to the message which has been peddled by Commission President von der Leyen during her whistle-stop tour in the region, namely that the future of the Western Balkans is in the EU. Now, whatever may be of these reports, both incidents are indicative of the low point that the EU's enlargement policy has reached, and to believe that this was once called the most successful of foreign policies of the EU. But even if EU leaders managed to repeat the 2003 Thessaloniki promise to the Western Balkan states at their upcoming summit on October 6th, those words risk to ring hollow in the ears of many. Enlargement is effectively going nowhere, and the EU's credibility as an international negotiating partner is at stake, not just in the region, but globally. Because foreign policy starts first at home and then, of course, in the neighborhood. But most stakeholders agree on the need to restore a positive momentum to the European project, threatened as it is, not just by its damaged reputation, but also in endogenous and external threats. The problem is that few have credible plans how to do it. This is where we hope to come in, because an idea has been gaining ground that a system of accession to the European Union in stages is needed to revive and to sustain the incentives for European integration perceived by the aspiring states of the Western Balkans, and at the same time, of course, acknowledging that there is a need to ease the most serious concerns of enlargement of the existing EU member states. So if indeed there can be a broad intuitive appeal for this idea of staged accession, then there is a need for its operational specification. Now, to introduce and to debate these ideas, we are joined by Michael Emerson, Senior Associate Research Fellow at CEPS, Milena Lazarevic, Program Director of CEP, the European Policy Center, the Belgrade-based independent think tank, Florian Bieber, Professor and Director of the Center for Southeast European Studies at the University of Graz and a coordinating team member of BIEPAG, the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisory Group, and last but certainly not least, Dunja Dujic, Assistant Professor at the Chair of European Law at the Law Faculty of the University of Osijek. So welcome to all four of you. Having lent a helping hand to shape the template, which Michael and Milena are about to introduce, I should declare a favorable bias to the ideas presented in the paper, which we hope to publish with Starinya Subotic tomorrow on the websites of CEPS and CEP. But in the interest of an open and, of course, constructively critical debate, I will refrain from straying from my task as moderator as much as I can. And so leave it to first Michael and Milena to talk us through the details, after which we will hear from Floria and Dunja their comments. Michael, the floor is yours. And if I can ask CEPS to share the PowerPoint presentation right now, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Well, here we go on a paper by four of us, two at CEPS and two at CEP in Belgrade, which we've been working on for some time. There'll be a paper, Stephen has mentioned, forthcoming very shortly. Our timing is, of course, topical with the summit next week, and Ursula von der Leyen, I think, is right now in her 3-day visit to the Balkans. She, no doubt, will be hearing how unhappy many people are, many political leaders in the Balkans are with the process. And indeed, nobody seems to be happy with the status quo. And so the question is what to do about it. The last attempt by the Commission to enhance the process in 2020, change the methodology, marginal. Abuse by some member states of unanimity rules, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, obvious. So, what to do? Broadly speaking, we are arguing that real incentives, real perceived incentives have to be re-established for the Balkan states to reform and sustain their integration process. We are proposing 4 stages of accession, and staged accession rather than binary in and out is essential. Finally, the third key feature, we consider that the evolution from stage to stage will have to be conditional, but on the basis of a new system of quantified ratings of all the chapters and clusters. So we're going to go through this in quite a lot of detail. It's not that we consider we've reached the end point, and I'll come to the detail in a moment with this next slide, but it is an exercise for us in testing whether the broad ideas that we favor, that I've outlined, whether they can be translated into operational feasibility. But we would like this to be the opening or the beginning of a renewed dialogue process with all stakeholders. That is not a pretension to having reached the end point, certainly not. Okay, now into the substance, and as you can see here, we are proposing 4 stages, starting from soon, initial, intermediate, and then key, stage 3, new member state, just before stage 4, conventional member states. Now, what is the content there of this proposed stage process? I start at the bottom with initial accession. We're supposing that essential starting points to have an association agreement that is functioning, to have applied for membership. But now, more complex, the ratings, fundings, and institutional relationships. For the initial stage, we need moderately good ratings for cluster averages. Now, Milena is going to go into this later, so I won't explain that. And similarly, for the funding levels, we propose should be progressive towards the level attained already by conventional members. And then the policy dialogue process also, which has a hierarchy of possibilities. And so here we are at the beginning, we just have policy dialogue and funding level at, let's say, 50%. Moving up to the intermediate level, here the ratings will have improved. from, let's say, from 3 to 4 in a scale of 5. The funding levels will have gone up significantly, and the participation levels will have moved up with participations, for example, in the council and the parliament, with speaking rights, but without yet voting rights. Which leads on then to the new member states. We dare offer this expression, new member states, to signal how important it is. Here, the conditions would have to be pretty good ratings all around. And overall, the proposition is the new member states, they would functionally be in everything as if a conventional member state. And the only limitations I come to in a moment under stage 4. So here the funding level is normal for member states, full participation in all of EU policies with the possibility to accede to Schengen and the Euro on standard conditions. Now, crucial issue, voting rights. At this stage, the proposition is that the new member states would have qualified QMV, qualified majority voting rights, but no veto powers in the meetings of the council in which they would fully participate, and in other institutions to which I turn later. Then to look then at the so-called conventional membership, which is the status quo. The difference between the two is very, very simple, important, but very limited. No veto powers in 3, but veto powers as of now in 4, and no member of the Commission in 3, and of course, existing member states do have a member of the Commission. But the proposition is that these two features of conventional membership, the veto power and members of the Commission, as we all know, there's a lot of debate, and most people think that QMV ought to be enhanced and vetoes diminished, and that the limitation of members of the Commission should apply according to what the Lisbon Treaty says in Article 17, but hasn't actually been activated. Next slide, please. In our forthcoming paper, we go through all of the institutions that you see here listed, going beyond those which we can talk about time limited today, but you see what they all are there. The question is how to gradually participate in the institutions, respecting the concerns of the existing member states, but having momentum in this dynamic process. So you can start certainly with policy dialogue, which can be actually very important. But after that, you have a possible hierarchy of observer without speaking or voting rights, then with speaking rights, but no votes, which happens already, for example, in Schengen for the non-EU states, speaking and QMV voting rights, and then finally speaking and full voting rights. So that's the schema. Next slide, please. Council, European Council, comitology. Let's just start with the Council, the Ministerial Council, because here, because of the legal decision-making process, it's easily structured. Stage 1, policy dialogue and observer. Stage 2, speaking rights without a vote. Stage 3, speaking and QMV, voting rights, but without veto power. The comitology business, which is fiendishly complicated, I think there are about 500 different committees and working groups. So this is a huge activity for our civil services. And participation in comitology would, for the aspiring member states and new member states, be an exceedingly important capacity building learning process. So broadly speaking, we should follow the model for the council, but do it selectively, because you don't want to participate in 500 working groups, do you? Okay, then the European Council, of course, of the supreme importance, but here, as we know, there is no voting process in principle like for the Council. So our proposition would be, and everything is done in principle by consensus, there certainly should be policy dialogue in stages 1 and 2, and the summit next week is part of that, and can be enhanced. But then in stage 3, there would be presence and speaking possibilities without veto possibilities. Next slide, please. So the Commission, I've touched on this already. No expectation of a member state in stages 1 to 3, unless the EU as a whole decides to activate Article 17.5 to reduce the number to 2/3. There are other reforms that could be considered. And what is interesting is, for here, we're touching on one of the 2 points, which, if there were reforms by the EU system as a whole, we observe effectively a convergence between stages 3 and 4, which greatly limits the possible criticism of second-class member status in stage 3. On the contrary, the stage 3 is looking rather progressive. And eligibility for employment, Milena will come to that. Next slide, please. Yeah, Parliament, this is very interesting, and it's quite nicely structured, potentially. We can have observer status for delegated national MPs in stage 1, delegated national MPs with speaking rights without voting rights in stage 2, and then to stage 3, directly elected MPs with full rights. Remember that the European Parliament has already got ahead of the game, or well in advance of the game, because upon the unfortunate Brexit, the majority of UK seats are now there waiting in reserve for what we call new member states. The other institutions, we don't have time to go through them, but this is just a memo here that in our forthcoming paper we go through them. Note that, for example, the European Central Bank already has a rotation system to avoid excessive numbers of voting members of the governing council. So they're ahead of the game also. Thank you. Next slide, please, and over to my colleague, Milena.
Thank you, Michael. So yes, in the section of the paper which we call the citizenship, we propose that with the entry of into stage 3, citizens of the new member states gain citizenship rights of the European Union, and also become eligible for full-time employment in EU institutions. We propose that already from stage 2, limited number of fixed-term contracts are possible in the various institutions, whereas from stage 3, normal civil status would also be granted. We would not like to front-load too much the possibilities of gaining employment in EU institutions, because we do know from previous rounds of enlargement that this does cause the depletion of the capacities of the administrations of acceding developing countries, and it actually weakens their capacity to further proceed with their work on complying with EU legislation and fundamental values. So in that sense, we believe that from stage 3 it should be quite limited, from stage 2 it should be quite limited, whereas only from stage 3 normal civil servant status should be possible. Next slide, please. Now, an important, let's say, other side of the medal of this whole story is how to improve the monitoring. We do believe that in such a reformed approach to enlargement, improving the monitoring methodology and rating system that the European Commission is using to assess the quality of reforms and the progress in the countries undergoing accession, that it needs to be improved. It needs to be made much more evidence-based. It needs to be based on improved methodologies. First of all, we know that at present most chapters get summary qualitative ratings in terms of preparedness, but some chapters are not summarized. Methodology is very often not clear, and there is a lack of quantification of summary assessments. Which in fact is done in other cases by civil society, by various international organizations, as I will mention in a minute. Next slide, please. So what we are proposing is to introduce quantification as a major advantage in order to permit aggregation, averaging, to also ensure that there is more comparability among the countries in the process. This, of course, needs to be built based on a better and improved and much clearer methodology for assessment. If we would use the Commission annual reports, we would still retain a five-level basically rating system with a somewhat simplified naming of the rankings, as you can see here in the proposal. Then we would require certain ratings for specific stages. And here we have proposed that Michael already mentioned, we start from moderate ratings of 3 for stage 1, a mix of moderate and good ratings, so an average of 4 for stage 2, and mainly good ratings for stage 3. We could, of course, get into details, and some more details do need to be worked out, of course, in the future. Next slide, please. The important thing to mention when it comes to monitoring is that such a rating system does require rigorous monitoring to be done, and this needs to be done transparently by the Commission, and it can also be checked and assisted by civil society, as it is at present in some areas also assisted by, for example, international organizations. We do know at present that in the area of public administration reform, the Commission is doing, let's say, a much deeper and more evidence-based monitoring with the help of the OECD, the Sigma program of the OECD. And they have developed a state-of-the-art methodology, quantified methodology, which they're using to really get into the nitty-gritty details of the reforms in this fundamental area of reform on the path towards the European Union. At present, this methodology, the methodology in the area of public administration reform, can be used, and it can serve as a precedent or as an example of good practice, which could be then spread and piloted also in other areas. And what we would propose to do is to start from applying this kind of an approach in the fundamental areas of reforms, where research and analysis of both the think tanks in the EU and in the region have shown so far that there have been a lack of specificity, very often a lack of reliance on third-party indicators, and lack of clarity as to what specific recommendations and benchmarks mean for specific countries in specific cases. So we believe that by applying an approach, a similar approach, which is taken to the one which is taken in the public administration reform area, we could actually lead to an improved monitoring in other rule of law and fundamental areas of reforms. Next slide, please. Michael already mentioned some main elements of the funding which we're proposing. Just suffice to say at this point that we believe that front-loading access to structural funds and increased funding overall for the reforms in the region is necessary in order to start closing the socioeconomic gap, which has been reiterated so many times in so many different pieces of research. I know that some of our dear friends who are also following this webinar, such as Dusan Reljic from SWP, have been advocating for this for years. So we believe that in order to stimulate economic development and catching up of the Western Balkan economies with the EU economies, we need to front load access to structural funds starting already from stage 1, where the Western Balkan countries would be offered 50% of the funding for their reforms, and where we would really get access, for example, to the European Social Fund, so areas which are of extreme importance for the development of our countries. Graduation of funding would happen through stages depending on ratings, but we would also foresee possibility of reversals. So funding would be one of the main instruments to punish the countries that are backsliding in the process. So I will mention a bit more on reversibility on the next slide. So therefore, there you go. We need to make sure that backsliding can be sanctioned, and this can be done in a more effective way based on improved monitoring, which we are proposing and which I already referred to. If countries are backsliding either in the enforcement of sectoral acquis or in the overall political mental areas, could somebody just mute Michael, or Michael, if you could mute yourself? Thank you. So we see from the current problems that the EU is experiencing with the Article 7 procedure that we need a more adequate system. And we believe that through accession, we can introduce this more adequate system, which can then also serve for thinking through further reforms at the EU level in general. We would give precedence to reversals within stages, so that a country actually that is already in a stage, for example, a country that gets a new member state status and is already in that stage, that there are specific provisions for reversals and withdrawals of some rights, funding or institutional participation within that stage. Only as a nuclear option, as a last resort, would we foresee a reversal between stages. That would be particularly difficult between stages 3 and 2, which is related to legal provisions, which I will go to in a minute. We would also propose that the decision mechanism for reversals is based on QMV of conventional member states. Of course, probably there would need to be an exception for, again, reversals between some of the stages where there are important legal implications of such a reversal. But then again, you know, even in the present accession methodology, we have these nuclear options, such as, you know, completely stopping the negotiations, and this has simply not even been used so far. So we know that these nuclear options, they need to exist, but we don't expect that they would be used. The next slide, please. So the legal basis, you know, we all know that the EU is a community based on law. So this all needs to be worked through in the legal sense, and this is extremely important. In order to enter into stages 1 and 2, so passage from stage 1 to stage 2, this would require unanimity of conventional member states. We would propose that in the reformed enlargement process, the member states, based on the relevant Article 49 of the Treaty on the European Union, that they refrain from using unanimity rights for individual decisions within stages. So we believe that only for major decisions for passing from stage to stage, based on the logic of the Article 49 of the Treaty on European Union, only for such decisions, unanimity voting by member states should be used. For all other technical decisions, moving, you know, and adopting smaller decisions within stages, we would propose for existing member states to move to QMV voting. This has already been advocated and promoted widely by many experts and scholars already for the ongoing process. We would also need, for a crucial passage from stage 2 to stage 3, we would need a signing of a treaty of accession. The important thing to remember is that treaty of accession has the same legal standing as the founding treaties. It is a more specific piece of legislation compared to the general treaties on the European Union, and as such, it can introduce specific derogations and temporary regimes for the acceding countries. We already know that this was used, and this has happened in all previous enlargements. There were various kinds of temporary provisions and temporary derogations, which were all done mainly done by means of the Treaty of Accession. This would, of course, include the QMV voting by new member states in stage 3, as well as restriction on unanimity voting in that stage. We believe also that in order to pass from stage 3 to stage 4, the EU would be able to use the passerelle clause in Article 48.7 of the Treaty of European Union. I myself am not a lawyer, so I'm not going to go into details of this, but I know that we have my dear Professor Christofilion from the College of Europe in the audience, and Stephen is also a respectable lawyer, so even if he's a moderator, he might be able to comment on the legal issues in the discussion, I hope. And of course, we believe that, you know, some of the changes and reforms that are hopefully going to happen in the EU in due course are also going to make these legal provisions easier, as we expect, for example, that the number of commissioners might actually already be reduced, and this problem might be solved by the time that Western Balkan countries get into stage 3 and before their stage 4. Do we have one more slide? I think, yeah, conclusions. So I think we have not managed probably to touch upon all the elements of this very complex proposal, and I do hope that we will be able to address various concerns and questions in the Q&A section. But what I would like to just say in conclusion is that this kind of a proposal would help ensure constructive solutions, would entail constructive solutions for the institutions, to restore reform and integration incentives, especially for the leadership in the region, which currently doesn't see the benefits of EU integration within their political cycle and within one electoral cycle. So this could very well introduce new dynamics into the process, somewhat on the line of the already existing new methodology of the European Commission, but taking it a step further and really, let's say, breathing new life into the essential logic that the Commission's new methodology was probably intending to create. At the same time, it would be retaining the safeguards for key concerns of existing member states, especially the fear of new veto players in the Council, and especially new veto players that might not be consolidated democracies yet. I would also like to mention that this kind of an approach, which would ensure that new member states are refrained from using veto powers, would also help ensure that countries in the region, which are front runners in the process, are not able to block the EU integration process of their neighbors for any sort of political reasons. So, for example, the problem that many people refer to, that it might be that might result from Serbia getting into the EU, for example, before Kosovo, I think we would quite effectively dispense this problem with this kind of an approach. One concern that has already been raised is the one over homogeneity of EU legal order, since this kind of an approach would introduce new divergences between member states in the European Union. This is something that needs to be discussed. We believe that Stage 3 is very much along the lines of the widely desired reforms of institutions, and as Michael calls it, it is a sort of an avant-garde of the EUF. So actually the stage 3 would already be, let's say, this kind of a reformed union that we would like to see. So we kind of hope that, you know, stage 4 might actually not even be necessary, because by the time that new member states from the Western Balkans would be making indeed to forge stage 4, the whole European Union would be functioning more effectively. But of course, as you can see in our proposal, we are taking precautions and making sure that even this possibility of an unreformed EU awaiting new member states from the Western Balkans, it might happen. So we have foreseen for that possibility. So this is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milena, and also Michael. You've taken a little bit more time than anticipated, but then again, it's also a very
that was anticipated
proposal, which tries to do two things. I mean, it tries to refine the accession procedure, whilst at the same time allowing for treaty change, institutional change of the EU, as has been a matter for debate already a long time. Could I ask perhaps Xavier to put the third slide with the slices, which encapsulates the entire proposal essentially, back on. And can I ask also people who've raised their hand in the chat function of Zoom to already give us their questions in the Q&A chat box. There, Zach Peiken has already provided us with the example. But to our commentators, Florian, it is a complicated proposition, no doubt. It's a very detailed one. Can it survive in splendid isolation?
Well, thanks, Stephen, for the invitation and also for the opportunity to speak to this proposal. I mean, I've read the proposal and I've followed the presentation. I think it is probably the most detailed and also sophisticated way of a discussion which has been ongoing for a number of years, I would say, of how to make the process more functional. I mean, I think the idea of staged accession has come about for a number of years. A number of us have been talking about this. We've also had some ideas in our group in BPAG about suggesting some kind of steps, and as mentioned, the new methodology itself tries to do that too. So I think this is nice and elegant. I mean, as elegant as any proposal for EU complexity can reflect that. So I want to, rather than go into the nitty-gritty details, I think that there are others who might be better suited to comment on that. Say, first of all, I think this is an excellent proposal, and I think it's much more constructive and helpful than some of the other proposals we've been hearing. And I think there are two problems what we've been hearing in debates elsewhere. One is this idea that enlargement should be abandoned because it's not working at the moment, or it should be honestly stated that it's not working. I think that's a false honesty, because it's not true that enlargement overall is doomed. It is that the current enlargement process is not working. But to say and to give up is, I think, flawed and also short-sighted, because while I and others have been critical of the Commission pretending to enlarge when actually it's not moving, that is also not helpful. It is equally not productive to basically say, well, those countries and governments which are skeptical about enlargement have won, because actually they're in a minority. I think many also EU publics are maybe not entirely enthusiastic about enlargement, but in fact, if you dig down deeper, as some have done in France, the results are that people are not necessarily anti-enlargement. It's now for the Western Balkans. They often don't know where the Western Balkans are. They might think it's in the Caucasus, or in Austria. People are anti-enlargement, but if you ask them what are they against, it's about Turkey. It's not about the Western Balkans. So I think we have to also debunk the myth that enlargement is deeply unpopular in the European Union. It's not. Most people don't care about it, and there's some skepticism in some quarters, but it's wrong to assume that that's a widespread opposition towards enlargement. So this is, I think, good in offering a way to prove for the countries of the region to prove themselves in the process, and thus maybe alleviate some of the concerns we've heard in France. And it actually takes the French reservations from 2 years ago more seriously than the Commission's new methodology does, which I think was a bit too timid, not using the opportunity to fix the process and rather try to just put a bit of powder on an existing, and makeup on an existing approach, which wasn't going anywhere. So this is good. I think the problem is with this is twofold. The first problem is how to address many of the open problems in the region. the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, which has been really not going anywhere, is the best example. We've had escalations of tensions between the two countries in recent days. And of course, the past assumption always was that accession would be the incentive and the process to deal with this, with a little bit of EU mediation. And again, this is less a critique of this proposal, but rather saying that this proposal needs to be supplemented with robust EU foreign policy in the region to address open bilateral issues. This approach will not resolve them. And I think it doesn't have the ambition to do so, but I think we have to be also clear that in a certain way to reconceptualize enlargement, we need both the process, which I think is very nicely laid out here, but we also need EU foreign policy to be more robust in the region, to address issues in Bosnia with statehood, bilateral relations between Serbia and Kosovo, and some of the other shortcomings in the region. So that's, I think, in a certain way, the first issue. The second one is, of course, how do we deal with the large deficits of democracy in the region? Again, this model is very useful, but it presumes that the governments of the region want to join the European Union. And this is certainly true for some governments, but I don't think we can say it's true for all governments. I think there are some governments, at least when I would look at Serbia, I'm quite skeptical about its genuine interest to engage in any serious process. It's much more comfortable with blaming the EU for not allowing it in, but at the same time not really doing what it needs to. This process might be able to, in a certain way, reveal these shortcomings or the dishonesty about some of the governments in the regions and their commitment, and that would be useful. But again, it has to be also then supplemented with a clear communication, because what we're seeing is, in fact, we've done an opinion poll and we'll release the results soon. The citizens of the Western Balkans overall are overwhelmingly enthusiastic about EU accession. But they don't often understand of who is responsible for them not getting there. The EU has to, in a certain way, shoulder a larger burden also to communicate the flaws of the process when their governments are responsible. And this brings me to the last point, and I'll conclude with that, is how, and I think that the proposal already outlines well how to overcome some of these EU member states blockages. But of course, this also raises the question of how do we get this process in a certain way on tracks when we have countries like Bulgaria, which have blocked even modest progress. And we have a number of other countries in waiting who are quite eager for different reasons to potentially block the accession process. There might be bilateral issues. So Croatia might have a few issues with neighboring countries, which might come to play in the coming years, and other member states as well, like the usual skeptics. So I'm not sure how much they're willing to sign up to a process like this, which it basically ties their hands, at least to some degree. So I'm just this is more a pragmatic concern, but I think that's another important one of how to move in that direction, which again, we should be ambitious. And I think this is why it's good, but it requires embedding it in a strategy of how to achieve it, as well as a larger and more robust EU foreign policy for the Western Balkans. But I think it's in this direction rather than believing that either regional integration or just a common market are good enough for the region as steps. In this sense, I think this is thinking in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Florian. Very, very helpful points, three of them. Supplement basically the template proposed with robust EU foreign policy to resolve issues of statehood, bilateral disputes. Two, the fact that the model indeed may be deficient because it presumes that governments of the countries and the regions want to play ball, whereas they are not. And three, how to resolve that issue. And three, how to prevent individual member states from blocking the process and voting for a system which will rob them of their veto rights in the process. Thanks for that. Dunja, over to you with a legal view, no doubt.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and to comment the proposal. I also had the opportunity to read it, so and I find it, as was already said, detailed, and I find it very ambitious, I have to say. I would like to raise actually three main points. So the legality of the proposal, sustainability of the proposal, and the issue of preserving European values. First, regarding legality, as I heard now in presentation, I somehow maybe missed it while reading the proposal. I would consider Article 49 being the only article legally for the entrance in the Union, so only article in the treaty that regulates enlargement. Since this article calls for unanimity, as we know, I would expect for treaty to be changed if we want to introduce this staged enlargement. Now, I heard in the presentation Article 48.7, and as I read it, so it says, where the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union or Title 5 of the Treaty of the European Union provides the Council to act by unanimity in any given area or case, the European Council may adopt a decision to authorize the Council to act by the qualified majority. So, in my opinion, and I did not analyze before Article 48.7 in detail, so maybe I'm mistaken, this article does not cover Article 49 or the issue of enlargement. It actually covers the policies of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union and the areas of the common foreign and security defense, and it also excludes the military issues. So I don't see this being a legal basis for qualified majority voting for the stage 2 to stage 3 or stage 3 to stage 4. So we can discuss it. As I said, I only heard it now. And then if we go for the changes in the treaty, what bears in mind is what will this bring to the Union itself? Can we expect the changes in the treaty to happen? And when we talk about enlargement like this, we for sure think about the further integration of the Union and the introduction of the qualified majority voting in more policies. And I don't see the political climate in the Union being like that today. Maybe I'm not right, but we know that the Lisbon Treaty entered into force in 2009, and there has been no changes in the treaty, although we see many areas in the treaty that should be changed already and amended. So the issue about sustainability goes for the, if we get to the stage 3 and we have a new member state, for me, I should consider this member state with conditionality that you already provided. So the punishment or going from stage to stage, removing some rights whatsoever. But I have two hypothetical situations. One is that stage 3 can last impermanently, so forever. And the other one, if it has a time limit. I think it was not discussed now. So if you have a permanent condition of the stage 3, where you have a country, a new member state that has, as I read, all the rights, access to all policies, 100% of European funding, citizenship of the European Union. So the only thing is missing is one commissioner and right to some voting in council. Then you have a country that has fully rights of the European Union member states. Maybe some country or governments of some countries would choose this situation and never, fulfill all the criteria. Or maybe all countries, all member states would choose to be a stage 3 country if it's provided like them to have all the benefits from the Union and, for example, not to respect the rule of law that is provided in the Union as some of the basics for the Union membership. And then if we have a situation where we have a time limit for the stage 3, what would happen when this time limit passes? Should we apply Article 50, so we have the withdrawal from the Union, or automatically grow from stage to stage and then remove the country to the stage 2 from the stage 3? Then what will happen to the citizens of the Union? At that point, are the citizens of a new member state not anymore the citizens of the Union? So it will, for me, really provide a legal uncertainty, this situation. So I think this is something that has to be regulated in the treaty itself. It cannot be regulated in council conclusions or commission papers or treaty on the accession. So this is the concern regarding that. And at the end, regarding the preservation of European values, so union functions like this for a number of years, and it will be the tectonic changes in the union structure. So we will, in my opinion, like this, create a second-grade status, because stage 3 is not full member state, it's still some kind of the waiting room. And what I fear, it can produce a domino effect on other policies and other issues that union already has and is experiencing. And the most important issue is that that criteria that union should be able to get enlarged, so to accept new member states. And this is where I will finish. I hope that I did not misuse my time and did not raise too many concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dunya. Of course you did. We all understand that very well, but the issues are fundamental, so we need to discuss them. And reversibility, of course, is one point which no doubt Milena will want to comment on. Also the question of stage 3 possibly lasting permanently, or should it be time barred? That's maybe a question for Michael here. The question of legality in Article 49 being the only provision prescribing unanimity is, as I think, was already addressed in the presentation itself. I mean, yes, that's no doubt a question up to stage 3. If one moves to stage 4, then arguably the passerelle clause itself would allow for change of unanimity to QMV within the constraints, of course, provided in Article 48, paragraph 7. Whether the political climate in the EU is ripe for these changes or not, it may be very well right to read the tea leaves like that. But of course, as think tanks, we try to move the needle beyond the existing treaties. Perhaps, Michael, would you like to take a first stab at the comments both by Florian and Dunya, and then Milena, could you complement those? Michael? Unmute, please.
I think maybe Milena wants to shoot next.
Okay, Milena.
Okay, Stephen called out first on Michael, so I was leaving floor for Michael. Oh, okay. Thank you for raising all these issues, and this is exactly what we need. We are aware that this is, of course, a work in progress, and although this idea has been around for a few years now, it always needs further reflection and perfection. Maybe I will just start from this issue of QMV for passing from stage to stage, because I think that this might be a misunderstanding. We are actually not proposing to use QMV for passing from stage to stage. But what I try to explain is that we think that the existing member states should reserve unanimity voting just for the most important decisions on moving from stage to stage, where with the clear understanding that for moving from stage 2 to stage 3, which is the biggest transition from what is now a non-member state to what is now mainly or mostly a member state, we would need a signing and ratification of an accession treaty, a more specific and a bit different accession treaty than the ones that we have had in the previous enlargement, but still an accession treaty. And accession treaties do have the same legal standing as the founding treaties in the EU legal order. That said, our proposal is that the existing member states refrain from using unanimity voting within the stages. So, for example, for nitty-gritty decisions such as the one which is currently holding back North Macedonia and Albania, there is no reason in the Article 49 why such decisions would be taken by unanimity rule. When it comes to the permanence or non-permanence of stage 3, you raise a very valid point, and this is a point that we have been discussing a lot internally. I even think that in terms of the EU's legal order, and in order not to actually damage the very logic and the essence of the founding treaties, there would have to be an understanding that stage 3 is not an unlimited phase, that it does have to have some sort of a limitation. This is why we're also thinking about providing a range of options for countries to be reversed, especially in this stage 3, so that the actual regressing or problems in compliance can be punished within one single stage. But then again, please remember that already when we explained the stage 3 is already practically accepting all and complying with all of the criteria. So in order to become a new member state, even with these reduced voting rights, we're basically saying the new acceding countries will have to have an average grade of 4 out of 5, which is probably much better than many member states, you know, are doing at this point by all standards. So practically the new member states would already be in compliance with all of the acquis, with the fundamental rules, but we understand we are creating these two separate stages, stage 3 and stage 4, with the understanding that because it has happened that countries which satisfied criteria backslid, and from, you know, appearing as democracies became a very dysfunctional democracies. We know that many member states, especially the more skeptical ones in Western Europe, would not like to see new veto players in the council in a foreseeable future. By trying to resolve that problem, we are trying to push the moment of accession, of creating these new or accepting these new member states closer into the future, into a nearer future, and also create a greater political incentive for the leadership in the region, because we understand that this is a political problem. EU enlargement and EU membership is no longer in Serbia, for example, it's a non-issue in politics. Nobody is discussing that because nobody believes anymore that we're going to join the European Union in the foreseeable future. By making it a more immediate political issue, we believe that we can create new enthusiasm and new political motivation to actually commit to these reforms. When it comes to the issue of homogeneity, and I don't know, maybe Michael can come into that, or Stephen. I mean, I understand that there is this issue of creating a potentially permanent condition. But again, if we are taking all the precautions so that it doesn't become a permanent condition, I don't think that this would be damaging the union too much. But this is maybe just my view, and I would really like to hear also from others, maybe from some of the participants on this. I just wanted to also mention quickly what Florian referred to with regards to how the bilateral issues between the countries in the process, such as the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina or Serbia and Kosovo, are featuring in this proposal. I mean, we know right now that Chapter 35, through which the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue is handled in Serbia's EU accession process, that this is, for example, not part of any chapter, and actually. Even Chapter 35 is more about the process than about the contents of the final solution. We should be careful not to present this proposal as a panacea for all problems and you know, anything that is wrong with the region and with the process. So I don't think that it can solve all problems, and it is not intended to solve all problems. It is, on the other hand, intended to create new political motivation and new political enthusiasm, which we almost had in 2019. But somehow it didn't happen, and I think that the political elites here in the region are always calling the bluff of the European Union on providing, you know, a credible European perspective. And as time goes by, this credible European perspective is becoming less and less credible, because every single new document which we have is more vague rather than more explicit and more specific. So I think that by creating these new dynamics, we might be able to create more commitment, more political commitment. But also, as I said, the fact that any newly acceding country would not get veto powers, it would also dispense of the problem that it might be able to block the newly acceding or, you know, the countries that are lagging behind maybe in the process from actually advancing in their process. I probably didn't touch on everything, but I think I shouldn't also. I should leave also space for Michael and others to come in. Thank
It's a
you.
good point, Milena. Of course, it's one of the most contentious issues, I think, in the proposal, and it is also reflected in some of the questions in the Q&A box. I mean, would extending QMV only in stage 3 to new member states effectively relegate these countries and their citizens to second-class status? So that is certainly an issue to still think around. But I wanted to turn to Michael, who's also seen, of course, the questions in the Q&A chat for a couple of reactions. Unmute yourself, please.
Yes, sorry, I was interrupted for a second. So could you please repeat your question? I'm sorry.
The question was not to you, it was to Michael. Michael,
Okay.
do you want to come in?
Mute. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I'd like to pick up on one main point raised by Florian, thanking him for his kind comments, but moving on to his issue of how to address the real problems of the region, the problems of democracy, and so forth. Well, my reply to that would be, well, first, our exercise here is a matter of system design. It's not obviously a question on how to go into political dynamics in substance. However, we are connected with that because the proposal is that much more credible incentives, financial incentives, institutional incentives, should be presented in order to encourage good political developments, which will be monitored and rated by our system. So we're not very far away from that. But on the substance, still, I'd like to draw your, I mean, pessimism may be widespread around this region, in and around this region, but I'd just like to cite one example of how society and politics can change in a good direction. Moldova down the road, which actually considers itself to be, if not Balkan, Southeast European, the people there were so fed up with a really lousy, corrupt, dysfunctional, oligarch-controlled regime that it succeeded in leading to some political personalities to say, hey, I stand for straight, clean, democratic governance and rule of law. And that was became President Maya Sandu, who then got a parliamentary majority, and now they're going about it. This is an example of, I mean, if you go back 2 years ago, the degree of pessimism over what the hell can we do with all of these problems, that pessimism was overwhelming. But then society and basic democratic mechanisms, electoral mechanisms, which still exist in the Western Balkans, changed the game. So that actually leads on into one of the two Q&A written questions that I've spotted down here. One was on whether the system advocated should apply to Eastern European countries as well, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Well, I would say, first of all, we stick to the treaty, and any European democracy is entitled to apply for membership. And then secondly, in actually our text, we are saying a criterion for getting into stage 1 is you should have an association agreement, which can cover both the SAAs that the Western Balkans have and the DCFTAs that the East Europeans have. So I would say practically, it would be great if some momentum along these lines could be got going, political interest established, and then the East Europeans will be very quick to say, me too. And I would say the EU could well welcome that. That would take some further mindset changes in some of our capitals, but still one can have that as a desirable scenario. The other question I wanted to comment on, was question number 2 in the Q&A, was what about these problems of second-class citizens, second-class member states? I think we would argue that anything other than full member states, 100% is less than 100%. Okay, the question is whether we're getting close to 95% or 45%. Our structure is way up in the 90% in the sense that there would be complete functional rights, including citizens' rights, no second-rate citizens, and we have tried to craft a system which could see a convergence between stages 3 and 4, in which stage 3 is actually, we may view it objectively, as more progressive than the existing stage 4, because it is already getting to the point of reduced unanimity in solving the commissioner problem. So I think all that adds up to the second-class member state label, which is around in conversation a lot. I think we cope with that and can put it on one side. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. If at any point Dunya or Florian, you want to chip in, then please give us a sign. So Dunya, you raise your hand first.
No, just a quick comment. Thank you for the explanation. I missed some things in the presentation, and as I see you have worked on the proposal since I've seen it. What I would like to suggest for the proposal that maybe I already did in writing to Stephen is that you should prescribe in a bit detail what is this quantitative analysis. So what does it mean, the criteria for the stage 3? Because for me it was a bit unclear. So is it which conditions, how many conditions, as I understood now? So it is mostly that country fulfilled all the conditions for the membership, but knowing the situation in the union, not being able to enlarge itself, this would be a solution. So still I have to raise the issue here. Why would any country, European country whatsoever, accept this? So, for example, if Serbia fulfills all the criteria, does Serbia as a nation wants to be a member state of the union without the voting right or veto right? This is also the issue of the political climate in the country. How much would the country want to join the union? Because, you know, it is Croatia as a last member state had to fulfill a number of criteria, and we were really at one point sick of fulfilling all the criteria for the membership of the union. And if somebody told us, okay, now you can be the member of the union, but you will be in this stage 3, you don't have a veto right, or you cannot have a commissioner. I don't know how that would be seen in Croatia, or would in general citizens be supportive? You know that we changed the rules for the referendum to enter the union.
Clear point. Milena, you want to respond quickly to this before I turn to Florian?
Yes, I mean, we already know that newly acceding countries, for example, are not getting accepted into the Schengen or the EMU right away. So in a way, you know, you could say that we already do have that precedent, that countries do not get all the rights the moment that they get into the EU. And then again, it is also a matter of communication, you know, I mean, to what extent are citizens really concerned with whether their government has veto powers in the council or has a commissioner, you know, one very expensively paid job in Brussels? It is a matter of communication as well, I would say. If the citizens are getting all the rights, if we are getting access to the funds, if we can feel the same equal as the citizens of the Western European Union, when I asked this question to the Macedonian Foreign Affairs Minister, he actually said very honestly that he would prefer even to be, a sort of a second grade member state of the European Union than not being a member state at all. And in this sense, we are really not creating second-rate citizens. We are just anticipating reforms in the EU on the one side and the fears of the already existing member states on the other side.
I think that that's an important last qualification, because indeed you could spin it as those countries being the avant-garde towards a qualified majority voting system in the Council, which would be generalized for all member states. Of course, you're right that it might be used rather in the inverse for political reasons. We see that. Florian.
Thanks. I want to just come back on something which I think Michael was saying. Of course, the proposal cannot be a panacea, and it's not conceded to be. And my comments were not so much suggesting that this should be part of the proposal, but that after all, the goal of the proposal is to get the process going again, is that we need more than just what is in the proposal. And I think the one question which really comes, which is to the authors, really, to Milena and to Michael, is a question of how do you generate a political will for this process? Because at the end of because at the end of the day, the problem is not that even the past processes could deliver. You could take it, you could take it to the drastic, say, none of the technical fixes are necessary because it's all about the lack of political will, the political will in the European Union to enlarge in some member states, and the lack of will in some of the countries to actually do what is necessary. And you cannot short circuit political will with the best designed legal or policy process. If the government of Serbia does not want to join the European Union because it fears rule of law restrictions, if the government of Bulgaria does not want North Macedonia except if it gives up, I don't know what, or if the government of France does not want enlargement, I'm trying to be, I don't believe it's as simple, but how can you overcome the challenge of the lack of political will, which we have on both sides? Do you think the proposal itself is enough to generate this, or what would be the supplementary measures necessary to actually, generate the kind of commitment which we're seeing is so hard to put on paper when it comes to the Brdo summit next week?
Michael?
Okay. How to generate political will? Yes, very difficult question. Simple answer, go to Delphi and ask the oracle. But to be less facetious, although it is such a difficult question, we know. What can one say? It's a question of getting ideas into circulation, getting ideas that may attract interest, that get widely disseminate, different alliances of stakeholders gradually converge behind propositions that are not yet politically acceptable. Florian, we've been through this a number of times in our European affairs. We only have to go back about 30 years to remember that monetary union was a good objective, excellent objective. Unfortunately, there's no political will to go ahead with that. And that was the status quo that lasted quite a number of years before leadership had the brilliant idea that a new initiative was called for, and they pulled out some proposals and went ahead. So these things can change. If you go back to that kind of case, of course it relies upon important key political personalities have to work out that it is in their interest to take an initiative. But if you go back in this monetary union case to the moment when Helmut Schmidt and Giscard decided that it would be a good idea to start the European monetary system. The day before, everybody said there's no political will for this. Thank you.
Elena. And can I ask also the panelists to have a look at the remaining questions in the Q&A?
Yes, thank you, Stephen, for that reminder. I was just looking at them. No, I wanted to thank Michael for taking a look at history. I think that is always a very useful exercise. I would just like to mention two more things. First of all, I mean, we've already had a number of meetings with the embassies of EU member states here in Belgrade. And so far, the response has been very positive. It seems that everybody's looking for solutions. Everybody's looking for something actually constructive that is going to help break this impasse. So I think that, I mean, of course, it is not easy to rally support around something like this. And I'm absolutely trying not to be naive about this either. But I think that, it actually might be possible because there is a number of people who are in the ministries of foreign affairs of member states who are actually searching for new solutions and for new ideas right now as we speak. So this might be a good idea to start from, at least. The other thing is that, I don't think that Serbia is going to be a test country for this methodology. This methodology needs, or this approach, this new template will need to actually show results in countries that are showing more political will at this point, and then perhaps motivate those that are showing less political will. So if I would dare to suggest which two countries could be the best ones to test on, I would say Montenegro, that is the farthest in the process, and that is currently, having a government which, well, with all its problems and crises, is hopefully able to take the process further, and with some encouragement, it might actually make it. I've already spoken to some higher level officials in the Montenegrin government who were very open to this idea. And then I would also say North Macedonia. Now, this of course takes us to another question, which was asked here by the participants. It is related to the coupling policy of the EU. The coupling policy is not a policy. It is just an informal way in which the EU is saying, okay, we don't know what to do about these other countries, so we're just going to stick them both together. This proposal cannot in itself solve this problem. But again, I think that if we manage to move away from the unanimity rule as a general rule for every single enlargement related decision, and finally create a formal understanding that unanimity is reserved for specific, most important decisions in this policy, that then, the coupling policy in itself will also probably erode, at least to an extent. Mr. Svoboda also asked about who decides at what majority if countries may advance to the next stage. Please, the first stages should not need unanimous decision in the Council. I think that this is something that is worth exploring and debating more. We are very open, and we do plan to work further on this proposal. The discussion so far has gone in the direction that probably moving from stage to stage might require unanimity votes. But and of course we need to make this also possible to swallow to all EU member states. So I guess that maybe we should not be overly ambitious and expect these major decisions of moving from stage to stage, which are granting new rights, which are granting increased funding, etc. Perhaps we should not be over ambitious with QMV between stages, for decisions between stages. Andre asked two questions. One was on Kosovo. There was also, I think, another. I mean, this proposal is not being specific on any of the countries. The issue of non-recognizers, I don't see how we can solve it with this. Maybe it is a question worth discussing in the months to come when we continue working on the template and on this proposal.
Milena, sorry to interrupt. I'll give you the floor back in a moment, but the proposal does point to one cluster, external relations, which would of course encompass the resolution of regional conflicts, bilateral issues between candidate countries, and with the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue already being steered, if you want, by the European External Action Service. it could somehow be brought into, or at least morphed into, the stage accession process per se. That is different perhaps for Bosnia-Herzegovina, where of course you have the Office of the High Representative, created by the Dayton Agreement, that sits on a different track. Nevertheless, the conditionality could be applied by the EU so as to stimulate the fulfillment of the mandate of the OHR there. And thirdly, bilateral issues where member states block the system would require, obviously, pressure from within. Germany and France and others should somehow put pressure on Bulgaria to relinquish their blockage of the North Macedonian progress. My 2 cents there, but back to you.
Of course. I mean, I have so far actually not regarded these issues as part of the external relations chapter, because when we negotiate for EU membership, we are actually complying with the external relations and foreign policies of the existing EU member states. And our internal relations have been managed through the chapter 35, which is the other issues chapter. This is why the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue is there, not in chapter 30. But that said, of course, I mean, with further thinking, we can make more specific proposals on that. But on Kosovo specifically, I think that this needs to be a credible decision by the EU to offer a more credible perspective to Kosovo as well. And again, I think that this kind of a staged approach could actually create a more credible perspective even to the countries that are currently lagging behind in the process. Now, of course, I think what Mr. Svoboda asked about QMV and moving from stage to stage, maybe stage 1 to stage 2 with QMV, maybe that could help for example, in the specific case of Kosovo, where some of the non-recognizers might not participate in a unanimous decision to grant it further status. So this is something that is well taken note of and that we definitely should and will discuss in the coming months. On the more technical question of application for membership versus candidate country status, okay, we take note of that as well. I think that obtaining candidate country status is definitely one step which is necessary for stage 1 to be recognized as well. At this point, we have not yet done an analysis as to where the countries would fit right now, because this is something that comes further down the road, and this is something that really needs to be done. But at this point, I don't think that any of the countries fits into stage 1 clearly. Perhaps Montenegro in a way would be able to already fit into stage 1 because it has all chapters open. Our logic is that from stage 1, all chapters, all clusters should be opened for a country which is in the process. So this is something that we definitely will be discussing further down the road. There are many other questions. I don't know, Stephen, if you want to somehow allocate them, or I have not managed to actually go through all of them.
But you've done an admirable job already, running through many of them. Perhaps with a view to the time as well, and we will need to wrap up punctually. I would like to already flag to our dear panelists to think about any closing remarks or main takeaway, perhaps your Twitter length takeaway from this particular session. But in response to Ivana Petrevic's question about, she's from the RCC, whether if we've had the chance to already discuss this proposal with DG NEAR or indeed other parts of the EU civil servants, we have not yet. We wanted to first find a format in which we could have this open brainstorming with as wide an audience as we possibly could before reaching out more actively to the institutions. I'm referring to, there's some other questions which come back on the second-rate citizenship issue that already had been mentioned before. I turn it over to our panelists. Maybe Michael first in the same order as, or maybe the other way around. If Dunya, if you're comfortable with that, to just formulate your main takeaway, and perhaps if you have any answers still on the questions posed in the Q&A box, to pick up on those as well.
Thank you, Stephen. For me, as I see that number of things that we already raised is raised also in the question. So the question of the methodology and going from the stage 1 to stage 5 is I think the last question, since others were mostly answered, and that will be basically it from me. I don't want to be critical anymore, so I raised my concerns and was really happy with the answers and with the clarifications. And as I see this as a vivid discussion, so I think that you got really good feedback for the paper, also from the audience, and hopefully some from us. And you know, you have to accept that I'm a lawyer, so we always
no, and it may be worth still a comment by our panelists as to your question: what happens with the reversibility, in particular from stage 3 new membership status to what? I mean, does that require? You mentioned Article 50, the withdrawal clause, which of course been invoked by Brexit Britain, which has spurred an exit procedure, which is almost the inverse of what we're discussing here. But of course, there's no forced expulsion clause in the EU treaty. That's a problematic proposition there as far as reversibility is concerned. But first, Florian, any final thoughts or takeaways?
Well, first of all, I think this is an excellent basis for moving this discussion further. This is, I think, the direction we should go. And I think there's a lot of other people who've been going and pushing in this direction of multiple stages of membership. I think this is, really the direction which is worthwhile. We need more, but that's the basic, I think, core of this process as I can see it realistically. And I agree with Michael that, you know, we should not hope for political support to come out of the blue, or we should not pursue something just because there's no political support. Maybe at the moment it's worth pursuing and lobbying for this kind of a proposal. I think the last question or point is really, it's like how to make sure, and I think this is a question which is beyond enlargement, but which has come up, of course, multiple times, why countries are skeptical. It's the worry about backsliding, right? The worry about rule of law abuses and democratic backsliding in countries such as Hungary and Poland, and not just that they are might be replicated in the Western Balkans, but how do you prevent it in general? And of course, this proposal is not explicit about this. Maybe it's worthwhile discussing, but it's certainly about thinking about these multiple stages. And it's not about, and I think we need more shades of gray, because I think the EU is a reluctant creature. It's not one which is prone to daring decisions. So this is why it's so hard to even take the existing mechanisms against those member states. Expulsion, I think, would be so revolutionary. I can't imagine the EU as an institution to ever think of it. So what one needs is rather more gradations of penalizing countries for backsliding, and that this becomes part of the DNA of the European Union, not just for the new member states, but for the existing member states as well, of how to deal with, because I think the worries of the Netherlands and France and others who are concerned with the rule of law and some of those issues are legitimate, and they exist, and they have to be mechanisms found to cover not just the future member states, but also the existing ones. So this kind of multiple tier approach allows for thinking about this in a way which we haven't been thinking about it so far. But this might be part of also of the cell of how can we actually include existing member states in some of these thinkings. Of course, this might cost some support in Budapest at the moment, but hopefully, this is government of Viktor Orban is not going to rule forever. But so I think it's thinking about it more broadly in the vision of future European Union, where this proposal can also maybe speak to some of those debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian, for those excellent points. Milena.
Yes, thank you, Florian. Very, very good point that the EU is, it is difficult and it is unlikely that it would take such hard and huge decisions, which we actually also call them, the nuclear option, the option of reversal between stages, especially stage 3, from stage 3 to stage 2. And Dunja's point is very valid. This would mean loss of citizenship, and it would need a very specific provision in the accession treaty of each of the countries on what would this forced withdrawal or forced expulsion of a country mean. So there is no article to rely on in the general treaty framework, but again, the accession treaty of a specific country would need to specify that option, that nuclear option as well. Of course, nobody would want that, and this is where the Florian's point of many shades of gray, more shades of gray comes in. We do foresee that actually the main provisions for reversibility will be the provisions within stages, so not between stages, and this is something that I would like to reiterate here. I see somebody from the government of North Macedonia, who probably from the embassy there in Brussels, or the mission, who commented that this kind of proposal would make senseless the whole process. And I really have to say that I don't understand where this concern comes from. This proposal would actually reap the benefits of the whole process so far and actually allow the process to finally get moving. Because if we're just going to stop and lament about the sad truth and the sad reality about us, I don't think that this is going to get us very, very far. And sometimes in the Balkans, we do like to lament about our difficult fortunes, but I think we need to be much more constructive here. This is why at the end of the paper, we are actually calling for the governments of the region to come around such a proposal and to actually be the proponents of this proposal. I can just refer to the specific event where I did ask the Macedonian Minister of Foreign Affairs. I hope I'm not getting him into some trouble, but this was a public event where I asked this question. It was a GlobSec forum in Bratislava in June this year. I asked this question, and I think that his answer was really incredible. He was able to grasp the logic of this proposal from just one question, and he actually said, for us, accession into the European Union is not about getting veto powers in the Council or getting a commissioner in Brussels. It is about getting all the benefits for our citizens, about getting access to structural funds and developing our economies. So, for any politician in the Western Balkans, this would and should be the main selling point for this proposal. Thank you.
Those would be the perfect words to end this webinar on, I think. Michael, do you still have anything to add?
Well, just no overwhelming conclusion. I've been able happily to speak enough already. But there is one question that appears in the written questions that I'd like to respond to. It's about how does our proposal link to, or how can it be grafted on top of the existing procedures underway with the opening and closing of chapters, candidate status, and so forth. Yes, I have to agree with the questioner. We didn't address that question explicitly, and we should do that next. But broadly speaking, on the substance of that question, I mean, this would be taking over from the existing procedures. To get into stage 1, all chapters and clusters would have had to have been opened already, such that the ratings could be done. Well, here, in fact, the existing system is itself rather ambiguous. The procedures for opening chapters subject to unanimity of all member states is a highly convoluted and slow-moving process abused in the well-known Bulgarian case. However, the annual reports of the Commission go through the whole acquis, all 35 chapters. So they are assessing where each of the 6 Western Balkan states are in relation to all chapters. That is sounding like as if all chapters are open, because the expectation, but in the writings of the Commission, is that all of the Western Balkans are already trying to get in line with all of the acquis. So there's a degree there of obsolescence, I would say, in the existing procedures that we would be taking over from and cleaning up. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank not just the panelists, but also our very active audience for all the feedback received. This indeed is very, constructive, and we hope to push this forward as mentioned before. The paper, the template paper, which will come out, will be no doubt food for further discussion. And who knows, maybe even inspire some of our dear leaders in Bordeaux next week. I don't hold my breath for that, though. More work ahead, and we look forward to welcoming you all back in this format and others to keep the discussion going. For now, thank you very much for joining, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.